Welcome back to another episode of The High Ticket Woman. Debbie Cottle here, your host. Today I have Reverend Dr. Jake Thurston. He is the lead pastor of Resilient Church in South Dakota. And he's also the author of the book, You Need Friends, which is what we're going to be talking about today, why we need friends. And on top of all that, he is also an adjunct professor of Bible, theology, and ministry at 3 different schools. Let's see, we've got Indiana Wesleyan. Am I saying that correctly?
Wesleyan. Close.
Wesleyan. Okay, Wesleyan. Indiana Wesleyan University, Wesley Seminary, and the University of South Dakota. And Jake is married to his wife, Casey, and he's got 3 kids, $2 and 1 son. Hey, Jake, welcome to the High Ticket Woman.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah, no, I could tell. You have an energy about you that I'm always, like, thrilled to have on my show. Please give me people with energy. I love it.
Yeah, well, sometimes I've been going on a number of different podcasts recently, and one person said, like, could you actually slow it down a little bit? I might be the one guest you have where people have to go down to like 0.5 or 0.75x to hear what I.
No, we're not gonna do that. I love it. It's awesome. All right, let's dive in, shall we?
Mhm.
Okay, so I've got a number of questions for you, and I started off with wanting to know, I was looking at your website, and your website, you really emphasize that God has designed us for, as you say it, deep community. So how did you come to realize that purpose in your own life, both personally and maybe even in your marriage, if you're willing to share?
Oh man, it's one of those things where you don't really realize how good you had it until you had language to put to it. And you just kind of took it for granted until you read the studies of man, how amazing and how much more flourishing you are in your life when you have good, significant friendships, especially when you're connected with your spouse. And then realizing, wow, how devastating life is when you don't have that anymore. If you go through seasons where you're alone, like we otherwise just don't know, we don't think about it until we stumble upon the topic. So, we'll dive into all the nitty gritty here in a little bit as to like why it's so good to have good friends and why it's so bad to not. But essentially, in my own life, when I look back, I've always been one just to love friends, and I've always had kind of a radar for the person who's kind of on the outs, always trying to make sure they feel like they're included in part of the group. But I can just think over, all the different seasons of my life, I can categorize by essentially the community that I had. Um, I think through like my core friend group through elementary school, and then how that shifted to my best friends ever through high school. And then I had a whole other different set of community when I attended Indiana Wesleyan University. And then when I worked for summer camps for 3 different summers, all each uniquely forming their own friendships. Then I moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and, kind of got my first ever adult job post college, right?
Mhm.
Had an amazing group of friends there, and it was actually through that group of friends that I was set up on a blind date with my wife Casey. So all that came out from there. So clear, great seasons of amazing connection. But then when I moved back to Indiana Wesleyan University for a couple of years for me to work with their School of Theology and Ministry, that was within like the first 6 months of Casey and I being married, and we didn't have near as many friends out there as I thought. Like I thought moving back to a place that I thought was home to me, or I've been there before, I had so much connection there. It was a very lonely season in our lives. We really only had each other, which was great just for the like the leaving and cleaving portion of marriage, that we really were able to lean into each other there for that first year of marriage. But it didn't help that we had a pandemic that we were going through at that same time, which kind of forced us to be a little more isolated anyway. But
You
that
you got
was
married in 2020.
we got married in 2019.
Okay, and so I got married to my husband in 2020, right on the
Okay.
pandemic, so yeah.
Oh, man. They talk about, COVID babies, and there's COVID weddings too, which
Weddings, right.
messed up everything. But that's kind of a flyover view of just some of, like, just my seasons of community and connection and how great of friendships I've had through all those seasons. So much of it was because we shared very similar perspectives on faith and a relationship with God that made those particularly deep, and a willingness to share the depths of ourselves that was really awesome. But then going back to, that place we were at for those short 2 years over COVID and everything where, man, community was hard to come by. Having the research and, I had the language to really describe like, yeah, this is why we're feeling the way we're feeling. This is why this is so hard. And I think so many other people when you realize the effects of community and loneliness on you, I think is a huge wake up call for how crucial it should be in our lives.
Now you studied loneliness pretty extensively, right? And you cite statistics like over half of the US, adults feel pretty isolated. So how does that affect the way that you, speak to people today, especially married couples? Like, how does that what you've learned through your research affect that?
Yeah, it's really profound because like what a lot of people have is a spouse as their main close person and no one else. In some of the stats, I have my book right here. I could pull them up, but like, um, for example, one of those stats is 58% of US adults are considered lonely. 1 in 4 Americans rarely or never feel as though there are people who really understand them. 2 in 5 Americans sometimes or always feel that the relationships aren't meaningful and that they are isolated from others. And there's so many more. Like that's almost 20 to 40%. Um, on one hand, it could be, wow, there's just this many people who don't have any friends in their lives whatsoever. That's crazy. But it
Mhm,
also could just be like, no, they have friends. They're just not necessarily meaningful or deep or close where they fully know you. Uh,
mhm.
yeah, so I think that's really, really profound. That can be really hard too, especially because you look at how busy our lives are. We just have all of these things that we constantly pursue instead, because that's what you're supposed to do. And then what happens is you become more like roommates with your spouse, and you don't have time to just socialize with people and just to grow closer to others because there's so many other pressing things that seem to outweigh that.
So let's back up a moment. You just said something about you become roommates with your spouse. So how does that process happen, and how is that connected to needing community?
Yeah. Yes. So there's a spectrum of the depth of relationships that we can have, right? I outline a couple of ways of how you can diagram it in my book. There's Dunbar's number, which says that there's 150 maximum amount of friends that you can have, and each layer gets closer and closer and closer. At the
Mhm,
smack dab in the center is your intimate friends.
mhm.
Might have only 1, maybe 2 of these. For men, it's typically their spouse. For women, it's their spouse and a best friend because they tend to always have that one person they really, connect deeply closely where you're almost as emotionally intimate as if they were your spouse.
Yeah.
And then you have your really close friends and your best friends and good friends. It kind of goes out from there. Um, so when you think about it, often when spouses start, they're really close, right? When marriages first begin, all that's fine and dandy, but then you get into just the throes of life and you have kids and then those activities start like we are obsessed with the hustle. We don't know how to live slow anymore. I mean, I'm a pastor, right? You'd think like, oh, yeah, Pastor Jake's relationships and his marriage must be perfect because it has to be. Um, I mean, we certainly are not perfect, and we certainly have all our other things going on. Once when we finally get the kids to bed, Casey has her side hustle she works on. I sometimes check out and, just start reading my books or do my things, and over time, if you're not careful, spouses can start to lose the intentionality of sharing the depth of yourselves. When you go from a spouse to a roommate where you're just sharing space, and ultimately it comes down to the intentionality of how closely are we willing to share the stuff that's going on in our minds and our hearts?
You're speaking my language. I love what you're saying. I'm one of these people. I definitely, like you said, I'm one of these people who has my really close best friend. But we only get to talk. We live in different states, and we only talk maybe 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah.
So how does this? I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about this. How does the need for community beyond marriage, like having really close friends, how does that actually support a healthy marriage?
Fantastic question. So, one of my favorite phrases, and this is kind of the summative statement out of all of my research, is this: "You are who you're with." You are who you're with. We become like the people we surround ourselves with, right? So think about so I'll get to the marriage piece here in a second. Well, studies have found that if you wanna quit a smoking habit, what do you do? One of the best indicators to quit a smoking habit is to surround yourselves with others who are well into recovery. If you wanna train for a marathon, surround yourself with people who are training for a marathon. If you wanna be in a good marriage, surround yourself with others who are in good marriages, because there's actually a correlation. Typically, people who are on the brink of divorce or are struggling in their marriage are actually friends with others who also are struggling in their marriages. It's this thing where we tend to reinforce each other based on our sense of friendship. And so if you're struggling in your marriage, but you can surround yourself with people who have fought for it and who are intentionally living out their lives differently. Because here's the thing, there's no marriage whose external circumstances like almost, justify the need for divorce over than others. I mean, there's certainly when I say external, I mean circumstances that are forced upon you. I'm not talking about sexual infidelity or any of those. Like those are completely different things. But like the hard things that Casey and I go through could have been the exact same thing as another couple that divorced simply
Mhm.
because of the mindsets they have and their ability to reconcile those things. It's so much about perspective. So when you think about am I friends with people who are reinforcing the belief that I need to be committed to this person, that we're going to fight for it, divorce is never an option, that we're going to do the best out of each other's interests, you're more likely to have a healthy marriage because of that, right? So there's that piece on how it reinforces our marriage. But then also for the sake of Casey and for the sake of me, like we each should have our own sense of friends and community too, so that we can be able to flourish on the friendship and relational side of our life. Because if I'm down because I'm lonely and I inevitably get depressed or anxious or more irritable, those are some of the effects of loneliness. That is absolutely going to impact Casey too. She can help, pull me up a little bit, but after a while, it can really start to drag down in a marriage and it can get hard. Um,
Yeah.
you know?
Do you think the whole extroversion introversion thing plays a role in this? Because my husband is an introvert and I'm like right on the middle. And I literally go through my life going, I need friends, but really all I need is my husband. In my head, I think that like he's my person. But only when I start to think about, like, if something happened to him, then I think, "Ah, you've got nobody else, Debbie. You haven't cultivated any other, really cultivated any other relationships or maintained them." So, speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a particular problem in the West that we put all of our relational eggs in the one basket of our spouse.
Mhm.
Our spouse isn't meant to bear all of our needs for friendship. They're not
Yeah.
supposed to. In fact, it was just a couple of centuries ago, when you went out to England, um, that it was common practice that you invited your friends along with you to your honeymoon. Of a bad perspective. And you're like, "Whoa, heck no, not doing that." Your friends and your family came out with you to your honeymoon, when you celebrated your marriage because it was a communal thing, right? Now it's almost like marriages, yes, is a celebration of weddings are the celebration of the marriage between a man and woman, but it is also often a funeral of the best man and the maid of honor in terms of their friendship and how it completely is different now. We don't know how to manage that. Think about that. There's a
Yeah.
grieving process. You're obviously celebrating them, but you're grieving the fact my best friend is now turned off to another best friend, essentially in marriage, as it should be. But then what comes down to it is, your spouse needs to be your closest, most important best
Yeah.
friend. But then you also like being like exactly what you said. You gotta have your group of ladies that you can get together and where you can just do what ladies do. I'm obviously not a woman. This is the Hype of a Woman podcast. I can't speak into that. I am married to one though. And I gotta have my guys that I can do, our guy stuff with. And being in part of small groups or other communities like that are just so crucial for not just marital well-being, but for your own well-being as well. And it just takes a lot of extra time and intentionality to focus on that.
Absolutely. So then before you even get married, it's, I guess, really critical that there's some, I don't know if compatibility is the word, but maybe connection between the 2 separate friend groups. Like, how, because so much of the time when I work with couples, I hear his friends, my friends, he thinks my friends are shallow, I think his friends are jerks. How do you like, how important is it that 2 people who are interested in each other and are coming together, that their friend groups blend?
Mm, yeah, it's obviously not like a defining foundational thing for the sake of your marriage. Because again, like you can get married regardless of the friends, but you are also marrying into each other's social contexts. And so ideally, you can become friends with his friend group and you can become friends with her friend group, especially if you're coming from 2 different friend groups. So you want there to be some good meshing. And, again, is it the end all be all? I don't think so. I think there are other categories that are more cautionary, but at the same time, what perhaps I would focus on and what would give me pause is the friends that he's hanging out with or the friends she's hanging out with might be good indicators of who you're marrying,
Mhm.
right? Because again, we are the collection of our,
Okay.
closest to us, right? We are who we're with. So that can give you a good idea perhaps of who the person is that you're about to step into a marriage relationship with. And, um, yeah, go from there.
So in this world of like more and more people feel isolated and detached, and social media isn't helping with that.
Yeah.
What advice would you give couples, either together or separately, for cultivating or creating supportive friend groups?
Mhm. Yeah. So there's so many ways, and I love the angle of this interview because especially in the relation like, in perspective of marriage and how to do that because like you said, typically each spouse is just each other's person. Um, so and get this, because a lot of times what happens is you get married, and then you all leave to a whole new place, or you go somewhere else, or at least with a lot of the young adults I interact with, not only do you get married you and go to a new job or a new state, you're leaving all your friends behind. So you have to figure out how can we cultivate that. Now, and I don't know how religious your audience is or how many of that has perspective. But whether you're religious or not, the rates of loneliness goes way down for people who are actively involved in churches. And a part of that is just simply because of how crucially important friendship and community is within places of worship. And so we're seeing some people actually come to faith in Jesus because they're lonely and they've heard that the church is great. And they're like, you know what? I don't even care. I just need friends. And it seems like this is a bunch of really good people. And then eventually you become who you're with. You fall into the faith beliefs of the greater church and you have all that. So I would say first thing, if you're not plugged into a local church, if that's something that you're believing and curious about, that's step number 1. Then step number 2, if you do have a church, are you going weekly? Yeah, I said weekly. The average church attendance is once every 6 weeks for people.
Seriously.
Isn't that crazy?
Oh, that's
So if
crazy.
you're not going weekly, how can you possibly expect to cultivate friendship? Like, it is a tailored point every week for you to come together, interact with some people, and, just the fact of, like, being able to sing songs and learn together, it also stimulates a sense of connection too. So you can do that. Then you can do other things like come a little early, stay a little late, join small group serving teams. Like, churches just have so many opportunities to plug into groups. And so that's always my first step of recommendation. If you're not stepping into a faith body deeply, beyond just like whenever is convenient when you don't have a kayaking trip that you'd rather go on or something else. The people in our church that are growing the most are the ones who are there the most. Go figure. So I would say that's the first piece. Otherwise, I just think like, are there people in your neighborhood, people in your workplace that you've always thought, I'd like to get to know that person. Take the first step and actually reach out and be like, can we get to know each other?
Yeah.
And that's just a weirdly vulnerable thing to ask of somebody too, to take that step.
I once knew a woman whose husband, um, they moved a lot because of his work. He worked in the gas and oil industry, and so her way of connecting with people in a new city or new town was to host a mystery dinner. And so as she would meet people, she would invite them to a mystery dinner at her home, and they'd come in character. And so my husband at the time, we're not together anymore, but we got invited to one of her mystery dinners, and she actually started writing mystery dinners because she didn't like the ones they were too predictable, about the ones that she was buying. So she had a side hustle off of the whole thing, but that was how I thought, "What a cool way." I don't know that I would have the courage to invite a bunch of strangers into my home and make them have to act, but it was a fun thing to participate in.
Yeah, of such a creative way, and you're exactly right. Because that's amazing, and we when we're in seasons where we're lonely or desperate for friends, we are always the ones hoping that someone's gonna reach out and invite us
Yeah.
to the thing.
So, yeah.
but that's honestly rare. That might happen 5 or 10% of the time. The question is, what's the equivalent of that for us? Maybe you're not throwing a mystery dinner where everyone's dressing up as whatever. That's so fun and amazing. Some people just are gifted with that. But what does a step of courage of reaching out and inviting them into something, over to your home for a meal, to coffee, play dates with your kids or whatever?
Stepping out of that comfort zone and just saying, "Hey, somebody's gotta do it, so it's gonna be me."
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, but what about for the couple where only one of them is going to church? So their
Mm.
partner isn't engaged spiritually, and the the partner at home doesn't have a lot of close friends either, but they don't have the opportunity to connect with anybody at church. So you've got the one partner who's making connections at church, you've got the other partner who's at home and not interested in attending.
Yeah, such a good question and a tricky question.
Mhm.
First and foremost, for the sake of that marriage, I mean, Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 7, that if a believer is married to an unbeliever, you stay in that marriage. You're committed to them, and you're gonna make it happen, And and truthfully, and this might take way longer than what you anticipate, but hopefully, because we are who we're with, the non-church going spouse will eventually get to catch up and see, okay, something's changing, something's different. I'm really curious about what's going on with this, and then perhaps, we're seeing a story with that with one of our couples right now, where her spouse is like open to more conversations of faith than ever before. He never comes to resilient. Very, very rarely does he come, but he seems to be opening up more. And this has been after, you know, uh, this lady has been involved with us for 2 years. So like there's just simply time that can happen with that. But honestly, it's like you have to plug in the best that you can. You need to get involved with the local church. You need to get, with those friendships. Again, it's for the strict purpose of not just finding these friends, but these friendships, and the more you're plugging into these communities, are going to form you towards Christ-likeness. It's an amazing vehicle of formation, is being embedded into these friendships. So again, in hopes that that's gonna speak to him. But maybe there could be some other times where, maybe she's a part of a small group, and you all decide to go out, and, like, you normally meet on Tuesday nights. You're gonna just have a date night with everybody out on a Friday night, and that's something that's a little easier to invite your husband to, right? We're just hanging out with her. Could you just come and hang out with her? We're just grabbing dinner and going bowling afterwards. This
It's
is so
safer.
it's safer.
You're not gonna get preached at.
Yeah, look, and then he can be more open to, "Oh, okay, I'm like, this is a non-spiritual environment, but I'm around people that maybe that can, open me up a little bit more." And actually that's something that we did as a small group. A member of our small group whose husband has not come to our church, is not interested, came to that, and, was at least exposed a little bit. So, I mean, there's a number of ways it can go, um, but that's kinda my advice in that way.
Oh, I love that. Switching gears just a little bit, I noticed on your website you have this, downloadable guide called the Friendship Matrix. Can you
Yes.
explain what that is and how to use it?
Oh, yes, the friend zone matrix. First of all, this came out of, a time in 2017 when I was put in the dreaded friend zone by a girl that I was interested in.
Oh, no.
Devastated my heart, right? "Oh, this didn't work out." She just said, "Jake, you're awesome, you're great. I just wanna be friends." Well, in my bemoaning, I was in the middle of doing all of my research for my master's at that point. I was wondering, why is the friend zone such a bad thing? What if there's multiple friend zones? And so essentially what the friend zone matrix is, I'll try to sum it up as best as I can. It's an X and Y axis, okay? So it's a graph, X and Y axis. The X axis, um, includes 4 different spaces of belonging that measure kind of the different closeness that we have with our friends. So you have the public space. This is kind of any general public space that you gather in. Very shallow relationships are in the public space. The, social space is kinda where you're sharing snapshots of each other. Like, you and I, Debbie, right now, we're in the social space. You're learning a little bit about me, I'm learning a little bit about you, but we're not in the personal space. The personal space are your classic friends. You're hanging out with each other. They know you better than anyone else. You're calling them over to help you move and stuff like that. And then the intimate space are like 1 to 3 people. It's your spouse, maybe a mentor, maybe your best friend, where you can be naked and unashamed and nothing is off limits. We only have a handful of those people. So that's the X-axis. It's the depth of your friendships. And the Y-axis measures the spiritual quality of your friendships. And those there's three types of friendships along that along that y-axis. Um, the first, and all these are coming from a monk from like the 12th century who wrote about this stuff. So I summarize it pretty easily. The first category is carnal friendship. These are friendships founded on sin, vice. They're very destructive. As carnal friendships. Then you have worldly friendships. These are kind of middle of the tier friendships. They're not bad, but they're also not necessarily good either. They're feel good. You just kind of go through the motions. But they're while they feel good in the moment, they can end in a moment's notice if things get hard. But then at the top, you have spiritual friendships. And these are the friendships who are committed to Jesus and to each other. You're committed to pursuing virtue. It's not about feeling good from the friendships, but how can we make each other good, essentially. So that's a driving piece of spiritual friendship, the pinnacle being, having a mutual pursuit of Jesus in those friendships. So then you look at your friendships and you're like, okay, how close am I to, let's look at like the 15 people I interact with most. And then you can start plotting them on this matrix. Is this a carnal social friend? Is this an intimate spiritual friend? Is this a worldly personal friend? You can kind of map them out. And the point of this exercise is when you map out your friends on this matrix, you'll see one, how many friends do you have? That can reveal your level of loneliness. Do I not even have that many people I can think of to put on this matrix that I interact with regularly? Second, you'll see how close am I to my friendships? Because maybe you have a bunch of friends, but what you're hungering for, your loneliness, is because you have no intimate and personal friends. They're all social or public friendships, right? But then the third thing is you'll get to see where they're mostly categorized. Because say you have a bunch of, maybe some spiritual social friends and you go to church and all that's good, but your 5 friends you interact with the most are in the worldly and carnal zones. That's an indicator of how you're going to be formed, because the closer they are to you, the more likely they're going to form you in that way. So you'll become kind of a mix of that worldly carnal person. No matter how often you're going to church, the closer the friendships are, the more they're going to form you. So it's kind of just a way to get a scope of where are my friends landing and how are they forming me on the spiritual formation side of things.
This is a brilliant tool. I could see the value of somebody downloading this and using this to really identify why, even if they're surrounded by people and, have a social life, they're still not happy. There's still something deeply missing for them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Very,
sure.
very cool. Okay. Well, we'll tell everybody how to grab that here in a little bit. Okay. I want to know, what have you learned personally? You've done all this research. You've worked through your own loneliness. You talked a little bit about that. You spend so much time helping people build community, and of course you're married. How has all of this shaped you, or even reshaped your approach or your relationship with Casey, your wife?
Ah, yeah, so good. Um, well, I'll start with, the last bit of your question, pertaining to Casey and I, like, we're just more hyper aware of when we're going through stretches. We're like, "Okay, we've just been roommates lately. We need to get more intentional." And there's I truly believe there's no such thing as balance in our life. We're not aiming for balance, we're aiming for harmony is a better illustration. Because there's some seasons where you gotta grind, all the things are happening, and you just kinda have to just be like, "Okay, you good? You good? Alright, love you. Good night." There's seasons for that.
Yeah.
But then it's like for us to put, let's get our pulse on it. It's like, okay, do we need to actually be able to sit down and talk more and catch up about things and actually like eat ice cream and talk about how life is going because it's been so long. We did have a lot more intentionality or keeping track of that when we're just kind of going in our own lanes versus needing to come back together again. So there's that. And one of the biggest things I've also discovered, and even coming on my dissertation and the research for this too, is how loneliness isn't like a destination that or loneliness isn't your destiny, where if you feel lonely, then you're trapped there. Technically, from the psychological perspective of what loneliness is for your mind body, but then also from the theological perspective of what loneliness is for your soul, it's an indicator that you need connection. It's
Mhm.
not something that's wrong with you. It's a part of your body that's signaling a need that you have. Just like how we get hungry when we need food, right? We get thirsty when we need drink. We get lonely when we need friends. So it's not something that's wrong with you. If anything, loneliness is an invitation into friendship. So when you're feeling that pang for connection, lean into it and let it be something that pushes you to the next step, right? So it's something that you're not caught up with. It's something you can lean into. And then the third thing that really came out of my research that surprised me is that one of the keys, if not the most important key to deepening your friendships, is sharing more deeply about yourself. Think about it, like, the depth of our friendships, the whole idea of being deep and close to people is sharing the depth of ourselves. So if you feel like you don't have anyone close to you, like, just simply reading the Bible together won't do this, going on vacations together won't do this, having play dates won't do this. It's the depth of your conversation of the things of God and the things of each other that you're actively trying to share, and so the more vulnerable that you are with the hard things, the stronger the trust and the bond is going to be between you as you share these things, and it'll expedite the level of closeness amongst your friendships.
Do you find, because I know you work with a lot of young adults, do you find that they struggle with that? There's so much brokenness in the world, and what I see is that that brokenness translates into guardedness.
Mhm.
So people struggle to open up. They struggle to let themselves be vulnerable because it doesn't feel safe.
Mhm. Yeah, so the technical, like, root definition of vulnerability is this image of an injured animal that is just open and exposed for a predator to attack it. So with that image,
That doesn't help us wanna
it
be
doesn't help us, but that's why we're so afraid to be vulnerable, because it is literally like I am exposing myself for the possibility of a predator to eat me up.
Yeah.
That's that fear, right? But, we're hesitant because we don't wanna disclose these things because what if they leave? What if they backstab me? What if they betray this deeply held thing, right? So we keep it close, we don't let anyone else in. Um, but what I found is actually the true source of strength, is when you can confidently say, "This person or these people know all the garbage of my life, and I'm loved anyway."
Mm.
That's how you know you are living, in the fullness of the life of the God-given design for community that He has given you, um, is when you can share all the crap and you're loved anyway. And it takes a special type of person in a group of people to receive that. And that you can do it through trial and error, but when you can recognize, and it's why I'm going on all these podcasts, is just to share the power of confession and vulnerability, or listen to Brene Brown. She's a lot more, to say about that content. It's way smarter than me. Um, we have to overcome that fear because again, I think our loneliness epidemic isn't from an epidemic of friendless, isolated people. It's an epidemic of lack of intimacy. A connection crisis is what it's been described as well. Um, so it's yeah, we got to do it if we want to grow in that way.
Oh, I I love what you're saying. I really think vulnerability is a superpower.
Mhm.
Okay, and that's really what you're saying. Okay, so as we begin to wrap up, I wanna know final question, what's the first step that you would, um, advise a couple who are trying to move away from isolation and build stronger, spiritual friendships and stronger marital connection?
So good. I'd have to see an audit of your life first because my guess is you're overworking or your kids are doing too much stuff and you don't even have time for friends. So that's the core question. Do you even have the slot in your calendar available to meet with other people? Because most people don't, right? So there's that. You need to cancel things. You need to have your kids do less activities so that you even have time to attend the small group on a Tuesday, so that you can even invite someone when you want to hang out. You don't have to plan a month in advance until your sports schedules are done. Cut something for the sake of your health and well-being. Cut something. So that's step one. And then step two, like, would we be as willing to prioritize the need to get with friends as high up there as work, church, and all these other extracurricular activities? We just think we're adults. It goes out the window. No, bump it up to number three. Put extracurricular activities after after whatever it is, friendship time. We will never sign up our kids for activities that conflict with small group on Tuesday nights or Sunday mornings for church. We intentionally say no to that because community is that high of a priority, right? So there's some prioritization that needs to happen in your life to make this happen. So then third, I go back to what I suggested. Find a church if you haven't already, getting more involved. If you haven't already, find a small group if you haven't already. Um, but the next step I tell everyone to do is you gotta be the first one to reach out. If you haven't, befriended someone and do this locally. I'm not even just talking about, it's amazing that we have these abilities to be digitally connected with people who have moved away or from whom we moved away.
Yeah.
Uh, but what we do is we then compromise and we opt for a shallower digital connection with good friends from the past to prevent us from having to get to know people locally here, right?
Yeah.
So you need both. Keep connecting with those friends, but don't let that be a substitute and an excuse for you to not befriend people here where you're currently at, because we need in-person connection is the highest quality connection that we can have. Um, so that's a side tangent. Because then from there, you need to reach out to someone and just suggest what do you want to do. In fact, here's a great example. Because us living here in Vermilion, it's a college town. It's very transient. We've had a number of our own friends actually just move away because they're
Mm.
at school for grad school. They're amazing. They have to move on to where life's at. So Casey and I are kind of in another season of loneliness right now. And lo and behold, because again, it's Vermilion, a new professor moved to town to take a new job at USD. And his wife posted in the, some community Facebook chat, "Hey, I'm new. I'm looking for friends." One, that's a great step,
Yeah.
posting those groups. But then Casey jumped on that, was like, "I'm gonna Facebook Messenger." They're now, texting and they're trying to plan play dates like that. Like you just have to take those steps of
Yeah.
reaching out and instead of waiting for someone to reach out to you, sometimes you have to be the one to initiate it.
What
And
you're
you'll
saying what you're saying is so true. I mean, one of my husband's and I's good friends, we met standing in the line, of an airport waiting to get up to the ticket counter, and for some reason, I just decided to start talking with this man in conversation that led to us being up in the waiting lounge together. We exchanged numbers, and, 3 weeks later, when we're all gonna be back in the same city, we went and had lunch, and that was 3 years ago.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
we are such good friends to this day. So what you're saying is so yeah, absolutely. Don't I think sometimes we attach the wrong meaning to people not reaching out to us, and we make it about, like, if they really wanted to be my friend, they'd ask me over, they'd ask me out, and
Mhm.
meanwhile, they're over there thinking the same thing about you.
Yes. Yes. What loneliness does is it puts us into a self-preservation mode.
Oh,
Right,
yeah.
we're on a fight or flight response, so we're hyper aware of dangerous social threats, and so when that's coloring our vision and our thoughts and our prejudices, we then again, we're on the fight mode, we're assuming the worst of other people, we project our insecurity, our loneliness, and saying, like, it's their fault that they're like, "I'm lonely," when really, they might not have a clue, and you need to fill them in on how you're feeling, you know? Yeah, we put all these expectations on others to befriend us when, well, have we even let on that there's a problem to begin with? We can't expect them to read our minds.
Absolutely. We could talk for a long time here, Jake. And I think the answer here, rather than going on and on, everybody, is go buy his book.
Yes.
You Need Friends. How do we find the book? Is it on Amazon? Yeah, there it is.
It is on Amazon, so you can head over to Amazon, and just search for "You Need Friends" by Jake Thurston. Otherwise, you can go to www.youneedfriends.com, and you can find links to the book there. It's also you can order it through Barnes& and Noble and a couple of those other places like that. I am currently starting production for the audiobook, so if you're one of those adults who still prefer adults reading to you, before you go to sleep or whatever, it'll be hopefully available on Audible here in the coming weeks.
Are you
So
doing
stay
the
tuned.
reading? Are you
I
reading?
am narrating it. Yes, I will be narrating it. So that's exciting. I'm hoping for sure by September it'll be released, depending on how production goes. So yeah, that's how you can get it.
Uh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. And the website youneedfriends.com, right? You Need Friends.
Yes.
Yeah, that's also where you guys can go get the, Friend Zone Matrix as well.
Yeah, so if you hop over to that website, you don't just find links to the book. There's like a kind of a flyover view of all the stats. You can find resources there for like the like a colored version of the friend zone matrix, as well as a number of other like recommended books that I have that form this entire project, as well as some different teachings that I've done on this topic too. Eventually, I'm going to have a page with all the other podcast interviews I've done over this, so that's still in construction. But yeah, that's kind of the hub for all things you need
Cool.
friends.
Well, good luck with all your projects, and thank you for being here today. It's been an informative conversation for sure, and I definitely have learned some takeaways that I want to apply to my own relationship for sure. So thank you, Jake.
Yes, thank you, Debbie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, awesome. All right, everybody, that's it for today. So, yeah, uh, somebody out there is feeling what Jake is talking about. Somebody out there is lonely. You might be lonely because you're not in a relationship. You might be lonely despite being in a relationship. And it doesn't have to stay that way, so don't ignore this. And please reach out, get help. Contact Jake, contact me, contact somebody, figure out how to start building community in your life. Even if your partner isn't matching you in terms of how you want to do that. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and like and leave a review. Let me know what you like. So until next time, keep showing up, keep staying curious, and remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be teachable.